All right, good morning. My name is Sean Millett. I'm the Director of Industry Partnership here at Florida Polytechnic. And thank you for coming today. Today is the kickoff of our industry speaker series. So we are pleased to have Jim Stikeleather, who's the Chief Innovation Officer of Dell, here today to be with us. I'll give you a background here. So Jim leads a team of information technology and business experts who identify, evaluate, and assess the potential of new technologies, business models, and processes to address evolving business, economic, and social trends. And he has spoken and consulted internationally on digital infrastructures and the evaluation of emerging technologies. He participates in international technology standard bodies, has multiple book and industry article contributions to his credit, advises a number of technology incubators, I believe some patents as well. But really, Jim's leadership experience includes technology-based service startups and turnarounds, as well as IT departments within large global enterprises. So thank you again, and please welcome Jim Stikeleather.
Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Okay, first I should clarify that's written by the marketing department, just, so you recognize that. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to share with you one of the things that my group does is we teach innovation. And what I'm going to share with you is part of our introductory course in innovation. And it's basically meant to give people a foundation on what innovation is, because it's one of those things, you get a dozen innovation experts into a room, you ask them to define it, and you get 24 different definitions. So I'm going to walk you through that. I have no, while I am noted for my OCD, I have no compulsion to get through all of these slides. So if at any point in time something strikes your fancy and you want to ask questions or whatever, I'm perfectly happy to go in whatever direction you want to go to. So let's kind of get started. The first question I always ask people is, why in the world would you ever want to be an innovator? How many people have ever read Machiavelli? Yeah. All right. How many people have read the Cliff Notes of Machiavelli? That's probably the more appropriate. Okay, honest group. Well, the key thing about understanding about innovation is, while it gets a lot of press, when you're actually an innovator, you're not actually the most popular person in the company. Because the fact of the matter is what you are proposing is change, and the people who are going to benefit from the change are kind of lukewarm in their support of you, and the people who are going to lose on the change aren't real fond of you at that particular point in time. So one of the first things you have to think about is, why do you really want to be an innovator? And this is really the reason. The fact of the matter is, if you don't take risks, you don't make progress. One of the things that has happened in corporate America is we've become increasingly risk averse. And in fact, much of the bureaucracy of a company is really designed to eliminate risk. The thought used to be mitigate risk, but the fact is it's actually to eliminate risk. And all progress is made by taking a risk. And in fact, the more profitable you are, the more likely you have taken a higher level of risk, because risk and reward are correlated to each other. One of the things we start off with in the class is a definition of innovation. And the reason that's important is, like I said before, ask anybody what innovation is and you're likely to get different answers. Now, I have been advised by multiple audiences that I'm showing my age with this slide. Most of you don't remember a fairly significant Supreme Court decision that was made about whether something was pornographic or not, and whether you could keep it from being shown. And the answer from Justice Potter Stewart was basically, well, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And in fact, for most people, that's actually the definition of innovation. I also want to keep you aware of one of the things that we teach in our course, and that there is a difference between change and transformation. Transformation, what you're really doing with innovation is you're trying to execute a transformation. And the reason it's important to understand that is, if you look at things like Six Sigma, continuous improvement, those are actually change activities. And the nice thing about a change activity is you can generally unwind it. The problem with the transformation is you can't unwind a transformation. One of the other things that we talk about is, why all of a sudden is innovation important? And one of the things that we've seen, this was done in 2012, and it was a study the Wall Street Journal did of all the 10Qs and 10Ks that companies have been filing. Those are the annual and quarterly reports public companies have to file. And what they found is in 2012, for the first time ever, innovation replaced productivity and efficiency as the most common word found in, other than the usual the, a, ats, and whatever. It was the most common verb that was found in, or noun that was found inside the 10Qs and 10Ks. Well, there's actually a reason for that. We won't talk about it in this particular presentation, but one of the things our research has shown is that more and more of the traditional economic frictions of time, distance, access to capital, and information are going away. And most companies make their profits by their ability to overcome those frictions. So as those frictions go away, the opportunity for companies to have profits are going away, except for what we call monopoly profits. Monopoly profits come in two forms. First is the traditional form of having good friends in government. You may be aware of your electric utility. The other is that short period of time when you have a value proposition to the marketplace that nobody else has. And where does that come from? That comes from innovation. So really what companies are trying to do with innovation is they're trying to become serial monopolists. They're trying to over and over again come up with a unique value proposition that somebody else can't compete with them on. So let's talk a little bit about the definition of innovation. One of the first things we spend a lot of time getting people to focus on is innovation and invention are two different activities. Invention is a process of taking capital and turning it into knowledge. That's what R&D departments do. It is creating intellectual property, is gaining knowledge, it's figuring out how to do something, or that something is possible. Innovation is the process of taking that knowledge or intellectual property and turning it back into capital by creating a value proposition for a customer somewhere. So that is the distinction between innovation and invention or R&D. And you need to understand the differences between the two because it actually influences how you make investments inside of your company. The other thing that we talk about is a lot of people, when they think about innovation, they think about innovation in terms of products and services. We're always talking about innovative products and services, or this is a disruptive product. It turns out that if you study innovation, the most valuable innovations, the innovations that have the highest return on investment, are business model innovations, followed by business process innovations. How many people think the iPod was a disruptive innovation? Come on. Turns out iPod's not particularly disruptive in terms of an innovation because the iPod was basically the logical extension of MP3 players. Now, Apple gets credit where credit is due. They ignored all of the marketing research on MP3 players, and by the way, as a technology group, you should always ignore marketing research because it's generally wrong. In which the marketing research for MP3 players basically came back and said they needed more buttons so that we could organize our directories and our files and our types of music and the age of the music and whatever. And Apple said, no, we can get by with one button. So they were innovative in that sense. No, the disruptive innovation was iTunes. iTunes was a business model. iTunes disrupted the entire media industry. Well, Frost & Sullivan did a fairly significant longitudinal study across innovations and across multiple industries, and what they found is that new business models are much more profitable than a new product and service over an extended period of time. Add to that business processes, and one of the things that we're doing right now is we're focusing our research on innovating business models, operating models, organizational models, and management models. We have a whole R&D group that's focusing on technology, and we're spinning up within our engineering groups innovation teams to move new products and services. Where we see our value now is in actually developing innovative forms of business models, organizational models, management models, and operating models. The other thing is you have to figure out a way to measure innovation. And nobody's really done a good job of that yet. But what we do is we look in terms of a series of attributes to say whether or not something is truly innovative. The first thing we say is it a new idea? It doesn't have to be a new idea. In fact, a lot of the innovations we're currently working on are what we call relative innovations. It is something that we discovered in our healthcare practices that we can apply to manufacturing, or something that is in the manufacturing space that we can apply to our banking, finance, and insurance practices. So that's a new use of an idea, or a new usage pattern of an idea. So it can be a new idea or a new use of an old idea. It has to be forward thinking. If you think about it, if you were working on an existing problem that you have and that you've been addressing, if you're looking at something along the lines of improvement, then really what you're practicing is Six Sigma activities or continuous improvement or constant quality control. It is only when you're addressing a new opportunity or a new challenge in the marketplace or in the industry or in your business, something that you haven't run into before or something that you're anticipating, that you truly have a fertile ground for innovation. We also talk in terms of an innovation has to be feasible. How many of you have Star Trek communicators?
I mean, how do you define a Star Trek communicator? How do you define a Star Trek?
Okay. You have a Star Trek communicator, which is basically your smartphone, for all intents and purposes. Okay, one of the things that we do in my group is everybody in the group is required to read a science fiction book once a year, because what we find out is science fiction writers are pretty good about predicting the future. Not absolutely perfect, but they're pretty good about it, and the way they do it is interesting. But I use the Star Trek communicator for a particular reason. Demonstrates two things. First off, they were a good, the Star Trek communicator was a, good prediction on what we have today, which is our smartphones. On the other side of the coin, what could Kirk do with his Star Trek communicator? That's about it. Beam me up, Scotty. Where are the Klingons? Has the red shirt died yet? I mean, that's about the extent of what he could do with it. What can you do with yours? Well, you know where the Klingons are, you know where you are, by the way, you also know there's a restaurant 3 blocks away and you know what's on the menu of the restaurant, you can make you have the entire sensor array of the Starship Enterprise in your communicator. Well, it demonstrates two things. Star Trek communicator was feasible. You actually have one. How many people have been on a transporter? The little equation, E equals mc squared, says we're probably not likely to see transporters any. Well, in either case. So that's what we mean by feasible. You can actually do it. It also demonstrates something that as technologists you should pay careful attention on. There's something called Amara's law in forecasting or future casting. And what Amara's law talks about is the fact that we tend to significantly overestimate technology's capabilities in the short term and seriously underestimate it in the long term. And you see this over and over with technologies. The great promise of the technology, it doesn't happen, and then a few years later it does more than we ever expected it to do. So that's feasible. We also talk about it being viable. The other term we sometimes use is sustainable. One of the neat things about technology is you generally can do anything once, right? You can make something happen one time. The real trick is, can I do it over and over again with predictability, with lack of variability? In other words, is it a sustainable activity? And that's a classic condition for innovation. It has to be something you can do over and over again. And lastly, somebody somewhere has got to pay you for it. It has to be valuable. Now, it may be an exchange of value other than money, but if it's not valuable, then it's a hobby for all intents and purposes. So that's how we go about defining innovation. Now, when you go out and start getting jobs in the world, and you're this great, brilliant, new, just out of school technologist, and you've got these great and wonderful ideas, this is how you will perceive management. These are absolutely a truism, the fact that you can't get them to pay attention to you. So this is the rank and file view of management when it comes to innovation. Now, there's always two sides to every story. This is management's perception of you guys. One of the key things if you're going to be a successful innovator is not just coming up with the ideas, but being able to translate those ideas into the value proposition they represent and to the business model that they will support. That's the only way that you'll get management's attention. Now, wake up in the morning, you're taking your shower, you have a brilliant idea. What is the one thing that's going to stop that idea? What's going to keep you from making that idea real? Well, you're kind of right. It's yourself. What we have found in studying innovation and actually spending time with our employees about where their ideas came from and what happened to the ideas, the fact of the matter is you will lose confidence in yourself. The key to being a successful innovator is your ability to maintain the confidence in your idea and to begin to pursue it. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to be successful, but you got to get over that first hurdle. You know, the classic example, the day starts when you get out of your bed. Same thing is true with innovation. You can't just have the idea, you've got to start actually addressing it. This is the second most common reason innovation gets nowhere. And by the way, I have actually had that conversation with customers. It's a great, wonderful, innovative idea, but we can't do it, it's never been done before. Yeah, there's a big dope in that, right? This, unfortunately, is true. The larger the company is, this is more and more true. There are exceptions to the rule. How many people know Jeff Bezos? Classic example of exception to the rule. You go into most companies and you will encounter this. I'm just going to throw this up here so that, because there's a lot of terminology that gets used in the world of innovation, and one of which is this idea of disruptive innovation. Everybody's shooting for a disruptive innovation. Those are few and far between. Actually, innovation itself is a continuum, and the way that we think about it is in this 4-quadrant matrix. And by the way, if you hadn't encountered it yet, you cannot be a successful consultant in business unless you can put everything in the 4-quadrant matrix. Somebody who's experienced it recognizes it. What we talk about is that there's really 3 levels of innovation. There's incremental sustaining innovation, which is basically improving on what you're doing it, but in some way either creating a new value proposition or a new process. What we call breakthrough innovation, and very, very rarely disruptive innovation. And the way to think about it is a continuum around your business model and processes and your products and services and the value propositions you create. What you have with a disruptive innovation is generally the applications of new business models and processes into creating a new product and service, which creates a whole new value proposition. And again, I will refer you back to iTunes. That is the form of disruptive innovation. Oftentimes, you can take your existing value proposition and deliver it through new business processes and new business models, and that's a form of breakthrough innovation. You end up basically disrupting your competitors, though you have not disrupted the marketplace. Likewise, you can create a whole new value proposition using your existing business model and your existing business processes, and yet have yet another form of breakthrough. Now, didn't know you were going to have a quiz, right? Where does innovation come from?
Inspiration.
Close.
Innovation is knowledge that turns on capital.
Sort of. This will surprise you. Most innovation is a product of failure. Continuous failure. In fact, what we teach in our innovation classes is learn to fail fast, fail furiously, learn, repeat. What we actually show in working with our customers as they start setting up their own innovation groups is you don't manage innovation as project. In fact, it's a major failure of most companies. We have this great idea, we're going to make it a project, so let's build a budget, let's get the program managers involved, project managers involved, put it on a timetable, have regular status reports. No. What you want to do is you want to have lots of little bitty, small, incremental, minimal investments in innovations, and just let the Darwinian crucible of competition among them actually help you select which ones you have going forward. I work for a technology company. You generally find 2 types of people in technology companies. You find MBAs running the company, and you find engineers creating the products and services of those companies. There's a problem with that. And the problem with that is I now have a universe totally of convergent thinkers. The way they approach problems, the way they think about problems, the way they go about solving problems is a very logical, rational engineering approach. Successful innovation requires what F. Scott Fitzgerald once defined as the intelligent man. An intelligent man is someone who can keep 2 totally diametrically opposed ideas in his mind at the same time and continue to function. If you're going to be a successful innovator, you're going to have to keep two diametrically opposed ways about thinking about things in your mind at the same time. One is divergent thinking and one is convergent thinking. Most of us are probably pretty good at convergent thinking, because that's what the educational system for the last, in your case, is 12 to 16 years have been putting into your mind. What's more difficult is divergent thinking, and it's actually the source of the inspiration somebody mentioned about where innovation comes from and how you deal with it. So I have a question. Can you teach creativity? Any other opinions? Yeah. Well, it turns out that management in companies think you can teach creativity, and this is their approach. And by the way, it fails miserably. And so when it comes to employees and something that management's trying to do fails miserably, what does management do? They call in the HR department. Well, it turns out there is a secret to all. Oh, you finally caught it, huh? I'd expected more out of engineers. Turns out there's actually an answer to this question. And I'm going to show you a abridged TED video.
Several years ago here at TED, Peter Skillman introduced a design challenge called the Marshmallow Challenge. And the idea is pretty simple. Teams of 4 have to build the tallest freestanding structure out of 20 sticks of spaghetti, 1 yard of tape, 1 yard of string, and a marshmallow. And the marshmallow has to be on top. So normally, most people begin by orienting themselves to the task. They talk about it, they figure out what it's going to look like, they jockey for power, then they spend some time planning, organizing, they sketch in, they lay out spaghetti. They spend the majority of their time assembling the sticks into ever-growing structures, and then finally, just as they're running out of time, someone takes out the marshmallow, and then they gingerly put it on top, and they stand back, and ta-da! They admire their work. But what really happens most of the time is that the ta-da turns into an uh-oh, because the weight of the marshmallow causes the entire structure to buckle and to collapse. So there are a number of people who have a lot more uh-oh moments than others. And among the worst are recent graduates of business school. It's amazing. And of course, there's teams that have a lot more ta-da structures. And among the best are recent graduates of kindergarten. And it's pretty amazing, as Peter tells us. Not only do they produce the tallest structures, but they're the most interesting structures of them all. So the question you want to ask is, how come? Why? What is the reason is that business students are trained to find the single right plan. Right? And then they execute on it. And then what happens is when they put the marshmallow on top, they run out of time, and what happens? It's a crisis. Sound familiar, right? Okay. What kindergartners do differently is that they start with the marshmallow and they build prototypes, successive prototypes, always keeping the marshmallow on top. So they have multiple times to fix, and they build prototypes along the way. So designers recognize this type of collaboration as the essence of the iterative process. And with each version, kids get instant feedback about what works and what doesn't work. So the capacity to play and prototype is really essential. But let's look at how different teams perform. So the average for most people is around 20 inches. Business school students, about half of that. Lawyers, a little better, but not much better than that. Kindergartens, better than most adults. Who does the very best? Architects and engineers, thankfully. And 39 inches is the tallest structure. CEOs, a little bit better than average, but here's where it gets interesting. If you put an executive admin on the team, they get significantly better. It's incredible. You know, you look around, you go, oh, that team's going to win. You can just tell beforehand. And why is that? Because they have special skills of facilitation. They manage the process. They understand the process. And any team who manages and pays a close attention to work will significantly improve the team's performance. If you have 10 teams that typically perform, you'll get maybe 6 or so that have standing structures. And I tried something interesting. I thought, let's up the ante once. So I offered a $10,000 prize of software to the winning team. So what do you think happened to these design students? What was the result? Here's what happened. Not one team had a standing structure. Not one had, if anyone had built, say, a 1-inch structure, they would have taken them the prize.
So what did we learn from that? The issue is not teaching creativity. The issue is unteaching lack of creativity. If you give me 100 kids from around the world in an empty cardboard box, you will see all kinds of creativity. Give me those same 100 kids after 12 years of education, and you will see almost none. So the key to creativity is unlearning the convergent thinking processes. You still need to be a convergent thinker, but you also need to think out of the box. In fact, one of the arguments that my team makes is we're noted not for thinking out of the box, we're noted for not even knowing the box exists. And that's how you have to begin thinking about it. What did you see? Fail fast, fail furiously, learn, do it again. That's the foundation of innovation, is being able to operate until you are successful. We talk about iterative prototyping and everything else, but what you're really having is a Darwinian crucible of creativity over and over again, trying different things. Does it work? Does it not work? How many people were surprised about the $10,000 prize? Weren't the least bit surprised. Management is blown away by this. Oh my God, everything we've learned in management for the last 100 years is wrong. You know, if you want something, you incent people for it. Turns out that's not the case, especially if you want creativity, problem solving, and innovation. In fact, if you get a chance, Google Dan Pink Drive RSA, and it will take you to this wonderful 15-minute video, which will go over about 20 years worth of research on innovation. And it turns out anywhere in the world, not just in, by the way, if you ever read a research paper, one of the things you need to be aware of is most of that research was done on undergraduates at a major university, which is not exactly the world's population if you think about it. This particular set of research has been done in India, rural India, it's been done in China, it's been done in the United States, and it consistently shows that if you want innovation, creativity, and problem solving, then money doesn't work. In fact, the only thing money is good for is to take the discussion of money off the table. Give me enough to live on, and that's all that I need. If you want innovation, creativity, and problem solving, you have to offer an opportunity to master something, which says if you want an innovative group, you probably don't want the experts in the innovative group. You want them there as advisors, but you don't want them part of it, because what most people are looking for is an opportunity to master something. How many of you have hobbies? Spend a lot of time on your hobbies? Do you get paid? But it really feels good when you're good at what you're doing, right? That takes away from it, exactly. So they want autonomy. I mean, they want mastery. The other thing they want is autonomy. One of the biggest impediment to innovation is the organizational structure that surrounds it. It is giving people the ability to make their own decisions, to take their own risks. Remember my description about the project manager and the program manager and a budget and status reports? That will not work in an innovative environment. You have to give people the opportunity to make their own decisions, and in particular, the opportunity to fail without a public forum judging them.
Some of you won't have time for that.
So, and the last thing is a sense of purpose. You don't get innovation by giving marching orders. You get innovation because people believe they're trying to solve a problem, that they're trying to create value somewhere, that it's something that's important to. That is what will generate innovation for you. And then you need to be able to facilitate and manage the process. My group's kind of unusual because my group is actually a small group. There's only 4 people in my group. But at any particular time, I can have up to several thousand people reporting to me because we want the group to be small, we want it to be dynamic. The worst thing you can do is create an organization because organizations become self-sustaining. They will find work to do even if there's not work to be done. And it is actually the intention of my group to disband ourselves because our role is not to innovate Dell's products and services. Our role is to help Dell become a more innovative company. And once we've accomplished that, then the only thing an innovation group is good for is a bureaucracy to sit on top of it. So what you want to find in an innovation environment is you want to find people who can help facilitate the process, enable it. Remember the admins with the CEOs? Which, by the way, tells you who really runs companies. It's not the CEOs, the admins. If you ever want to get, do well in make friends with all of the administrative assistants because they're the ones who actually run the company. Okay, let me talk a little bit about my main mission, which is, oops, sorry about that, to create a corporate culture of innovation. We've learned a few things about how you go about doing that. First off, you have to have a common language to talk about innovation. And that's pretty much what I've been sharing with you, is how we talk about innovation. The difference between innovation and invention and R&D, the attributes of an innovation, that innovation is not just the products and services, it is across all of the models of the organization. So you have to come up with a common language. Then you have to have the right people and the right processes. Let me talk about the right people anymore for a minute. How many people believe, I'm going to give you a lead-in, the myth of the lone innovator? Because I said, one brave soul here, right? I didn't prejudice you with the word myth, right? Well, it turns out that if you study innovation, almost all innovation requires 3 personas to be involved. Now, maybe rarely all 3 personas will be in one person, but generally there are multiple people involved. And the 3 personas are this. There is the idea generator, the person who sees the problem, the opportunity to fix the problem, and how to go about doing it. Then there is the idea manifester, the person who takes that idea and makes it real. And not any less important, the idea communicator, the person who can take the manifested idea and get other people to understand its value and make them want to exchange value for it. Now, I'm always responded back to, well, what about Steve Jobs? Well, Steve Jobs was what? He was the idea generator. He came up with the ideas. Who was his partner in crime that he wouldn't be who he would be? Woz. What was Woz? The idea manifester. How many people have ever heard of Regis McKenna? Regis McKenna joined Apple and actually helped form the company, and he ran the marketing programs that made Apple what it was. He was a communicator. You would not have Apple today if it wasn't for Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Regis McKenna. All 3 of them. So even the most classic examples have that. Right rewards and incentives, that should be self-evident. We just went through the video and we saw that if you pay people for innovation, you're not going to get it. And then the role of leadership is different in innovation. When you're talking about getting people to do the same thing over and over again, doing the jobs, traditional manufacturing roles, and even very much traditional service delivery roles, you actually need the traditional management as it's taught in business school. You need something different when you're talking about innovation. First and foremost, you need to be engaged. You don't sit around and say, okay, I need my monthly status report. You should be so engaged that you shouldn't have to have a status report to begin with. You should know what's going on. You don't tell people what to do. You describe to them what you're trying to accomplish. So you set the context of the innovation that you want to have going on. One of the key roles of a leader in innovation, as opposed to a manager, is a manager enforces the rules. What does a leader do in innovation? Break the rules. Knowing when to break the rules is as important as knowing how to break the rules. In fact, there's a famous Dalai Lama quote that says, know the rules so well that you know how to appropriately break them. And that's what an innovation leader has to do. I mentioned the process. I'm going to walk you through our process very quickly because a lot of people have this idea that you sit around at the coffee shop and you talk and you have discussions and then great ideas appear. Actually, they don't. Okay, the way innovation actually takes place is first you need what's called a foresight activity. You need to have some idea about what the future is going to look like. And this is the process that my team use. It's basically an environmental scanning process. And what we are looking at is we're looking at things, what are thought leaders talking about, what have thought leaders quit talking about, what's going on in social media, what's happening in research labs. And we're really looking at what people are going to want in the future. This is a little different. If you look at most technology companies, when they forecast, they actually forecast. We call this future casting. What they're doing is they're doing things and taking like Moore's Law and saying, okay, we can predict storage is going to look like this and the price point will be like this and therefore we can offer it at this. And CPUs will be at this rate and we'll get this level of density of circuitry on the chips. We'll be able to put this many chips on the board. We'll be able to achieve these heating and cooling parameters. That's not what we do. What we do is we look at usage patterns of technology. What are people using technology for? What are the capabilities they're trying to accomplish? What are the outcomes they want to accomplish and how are they using technology to do it? So it's a little bit different than how you would normally think about it. Then we have an insight process. This is the other one was our outwardly looking process. This is our inwardly looking process. And what we're doing is we're looking at all the capabilities we have. We have an R&D group, and the R&D group in Dell puts out what's called the Dell Technology Outlook, which is exactly what I was describing before. Here's what chips will be able to do. Here's how here's the level of advances we expect in deep learning. How is it going to apply? Where can we apply it? That's the technology forecasting part of it. We also are looking at what our capability is as a company, because there's no sense, remember that feasible piece that I was talking about before? What is it that we can really accomplish as a company? And then we run crowdsourcing activities. The great thing about innovation is there really is a wisdom of the crowd. And within Dell, we actually identify challenges and opportunities that we share with all of the employees. And they actually provide ideas back. They actually evaluate and stat rank the ideas themselves. They continually improve them. And then we have a small group that actually comes in and picks the select final ones out of it. The largest one we've run is with 6,000 employees in one of our crowdsourcing activities. And then we take all of this stuff and we mash it up. I jokingly say that we take our foresight team and we take our insight team, we put them in a padded room, we throw in raw meat, and whoever walks out alive wins. Now, what really ends up happening is the foresight team is coming up with all of these great, wonderful science fiction stories about the future, and generally, and by the way, those are my divergent thinkers. And then I have the insight people coming up with all of the reasons it's not going to happen, right? But when that rare thing happens where the foresight people convince the insight people that, you know, we hadn't thought about that, maybe that would work, then we have a true opportunity. And what we do from those, we generate scenarios. We actually do call them science fiction stories. In fact, you write a scenario up in terms of a science fiction story because it's the easiest way to communicate to the rest of the organization what you're talking about. Interesting thing about human beings, we retain stories much better than we retain facts and figures. So if you really want to communicate your idea, put it in the form of a story. Now, what these science fiction stories are about is this is how people want the future to look like. Here are the outcomes they're trying to accomplish. What capabilities do they have to accomplish those outcomes? And then what technologies can be used to achieve those capabilities? Now, that's a little backwards from the way most companies do their forecasting, but it's the way that we found this to be most effective. Because one of the key things that we believe is the fact that technology does not cause change, which is very hard for engineers to accept, by the way. Technology can only enable, facilitate, and accelerate a change that already wants to take place. That something has happened in society or in the legal regulatory environment or in the economy or in the nature of business that changes the way something that people want. And then technology can make that change happen. Have you ever heard the term product before its time? That's what we're talking about. Now, don't worry about that slide. I always tell my executive team, I'm 99.999% sure I'm right. Just don't ask me when I'll be right. Well, that doesn't play really well, as you might imagine, with the executive team. So one of the things that we've been working on is, and I'm sure you'll end up covering it in a course somewhere along the line, is Roger's theory of innovation diffusion, diffusion of innovation. And what we've been able to do is actually modify that and actually show how one can manipulate your investments in order to avoid being disruptive via innovation, in order to extend the lives of your particular products and still stay on the appropriate curves. This is probably the most academic thing we have going on right now, and actually we're working on a couple of papers based upon it. The other thing is this valuable part, and one of the things you always have to be thinking about when you're working on innovation, coming up with new products and services, or if some of you ever want to be entrepreneurs, you know what the difficult part about being an entrepreneur? It's crafting your business model. That's the most difficult part. So understanding that where value comes from, and this is actually a model that we've been working on that actually shows that if you're the entrepreneur and you're going to be doing, creating products and services and how you're going to translate those, that what you have to drive that to are the outcomes that that you will identify when you do your future casting and foresight activities and how you map to those. To give you a sample of some of the work that, I was talking about our science fiction stories. Here, at any particular point in time, we have just under 200 that we're tracking, which is a lot of work for 4 people, as you might can imagine. So we have some help going on, working with it. And these are some of the more interesting things that we currently have underway. How many people know Internet of Things? Everybody's kind of heard about the Internet of Things, right? The Internet of Things is not interesting to us. What's interesting to us is intelligent everything. You see how we begin shifting the focus away from the technology to the potential outcomes that would come from the technologies. Something that's really interesting right now for us is the fact that there's a real impedance mismatch between the traditional workforce and you guys. You guys work differently than we do. You work 24/7. Now, when I say that in front of an audience of my age, they all start laughing. Yeah, right. Well, the fact is you do. You get up in the morning, you sign on, and you work for a little while. And then you get off and you go for your run, you take your shower, you sign back on, you work for a little while. And then you go to Starbucks and you work for a little while. And then you come in, get together with your friends for a while and you work for, you actually do work 7x24x52. You just do it in like 30-minute increments throughout the day. Well, guess what? Businesses are not set up to work that way. Most businesses can't keep their systems up 7x24x52. That's one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is my generation, we focused on who we worked for. You're more interested on what you work on and who you work with. How many people have heard the disparaging term gig economy? That's what Hillary refers to it as. It's the fact is that most of you guys don't want full-time employment. You want to be working on certain projects that are interesting over time and whatever, and you want to, and who you work with. And what we're seeing, the term is coming up as the Hollywood model. And if you're familiar, I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, all of the people who work on a movie do not work for the studio. They're all independent contractors. They come together, they create the movie, and they disband. We are seeing that model being repeated over and over again across industries. We were talking earlier this morning. How many people, you've seen that the economy is growing, what was it, 125,000 jobs last quarter? 80% of those jobs are contingent jobs. They are contracting jobs. They are jobs where you come in, you work, and then you leave for a while. Radically different focus than what we see today. Some of the others we find interesting. How many people have heard of Bitcoin? I always expect this group would. What's interesting about Bitcoin is not the cryptocurrencies themselves, but the underlying technology of the cryptocurrencies called blockchain. And we're seeing total disruptions of industry starting to take place because blockchain eliminates the need for trusted third-party intermediaries and transactions. And that probably doesn't mean a lot to you, but it means you don't need insurance companies, you don't need banks, you don't need legal institutions. That'll be a major disruption.
Until somebody cracks it. Until somebody cracks it.
There's a yes and no to that, and not to go into the details, but there's a current fork going on in the blockchain code. And the fork does a couple of things. One, it expands. Right now, blockchain can't handle transaction rates that you would need to replace everything. The fork will allow that. The fork also introduces some new security. But the really neat thing about blockchain is the way it's enforced is through validation on the miners. And that one would be hard to, that's almost not crackable, the way that it's done. Well, you would have to have at least be able to pretend you were 7 different miners to do it. I mean, it's conceivable, a state could probably do it. Do what? Yeah, I'll leave that to the text of the debate. The other thing that's been coming up, remember me talking about we're looking at new management models? How many people have seen this? This is the Kinefin framework. It comes from complex adaptive systems theory. If you think about the enterprise of the future is made up of people who don't work for it, made up of technology it probably doesn't own. How many people have heard of Uber? Largest transportation company in the world, owns no cars. Airbnb, largest hospitality company in the world, owns no properties. Alibaba, largest retailer in the world, has no inventory and no stores. Yes? Oh, you were acknowledging you had heard of Alibaba. So there's this whole massive change in the way organizations work. Now, if you think about how companies have worked for the last literally thousands of years, this is what's taught in most management courses. There is a problem. Your job as a manager is to sense the problem, identify there is a problem, categorize the problem, what kind of problem is it, and then go look up or find the best practice for solving the problem. If you think about it, a contemporary traditional capitalist business is what's called what is a simple system. Every once in a while, you run into a situation that you're not really sure about. You sense there's a problem, but you don't know, you can't categorize it. So what do? You go bring in the high-priced consultants, who then categorize it for you and tell you what best practice to go implement. Well, guess what? With machine learning, deep learning, predictive and prescriptive analytics, the AIs can do all of this. You don't need managers to do this anymore. The focus of managers is to move over into this place of complex systems where you don't know what you don't know. And being able to do things like probe the environment, see how the system or the economy or the marketplace reacts to your probe, then adjust and then act. And what does that sound like? Fail fast, fail furiously, learn, repeat until you're successful. So once again, we have another data point that says the future of all organizations are in their ability to be continuous serial innovators in some way, shape, or form. This is actually an area that I'm currently playing around with my doctorate, and whether I'll ever get done with it, we'll never know. Ye of little faith, right, with my work schedule. And it's new models of organizations. Hierarchical organizations do not work in an environment where you have no control over your resources. Everything is based upon trust and dynamic relationships. You don't have the employees. You may not be using your own IP. And what this is a combination of a whole bunch of psychological, sociological, and believe it or not, military models on how to perform in combat. So this is another area that we're spending a lot of time on. And believe it or not, it's actually in existence. How many people have heard of the Shanzai? They are the Chinese companies that make all of the knockoff products. They're small to medium-sized enterprises, and they have a really interesting problem. They have no access to the legal system, which means no enforceable contracts, no employment contracts, you can't ensure anything takes place, no banking relationships for all intents and purposes. By the way, the biggest use of Bitcoin right now is in China, Greece, and Argentina. Guess why? And the way they work is they work totally on the basis of trust. If I wanted to create a knockoff iPhone, I could go to one of them and say, here's what I want. They would dynamically among themselves, totally based upon trust, contracts or anything, basically partial out who's going to do the design, who's going to do the engineering, who's going to do the components requisition, who's going to do component assembly, who's going to do packaging, who's going to be shipping, and do it all totally dynamically without any contracts whatsoever. So these are the models that we're starting to show. So let's kind of close everything out here. I hope I've convinced you that the future of all enterprises, whether they're a one-man company or the largest corporation, is their ability to become a serial innovator, a continuous serial innovator, a consistent continuous serial innovator, because that's where all profit's going to come from. I hope I've given you a pretty good definition of how or at least the attributes of recognizing an innovation. I hope that I have convinced you that innovation comes from failure. That if you're not willing to take risks and take chances and do it over and over again, as long as you are learning and incorporating that learning in the next attempt, then you will be innovative. If you ever become a master, if you ever become a manager or a leader in an organization that has to be innovative, the key thing you have to do is get out of the way. Set the parameters of what you want to be accomplished and get out of the way and let the people do it. Innovation is a team sport. I walked over that you needed the 3 personas. Sometimes that 3 personas is spread across a team of 100 people, each of which contributing some part of it. And sometimes they're not all engineers. In fact, you're probably better off if you don't have an engineer because you're more likely to get a divergent thinker that way. And then lastly, the key is, if you're going to be running a company, is to how do you create a culture of innovation? And you do it through identifying the right people. I talked about the 3 personas, the right processes. I walked you through the processes that we go through. The right words, having a common vocabulary to be able to talk about it, the right incentives, which is basically let people do what they think they need to do, and then having the right leaders, the ones that can actually take the place. And with that, I think I am done. So I'll open it up for any questions anybody might have.
Yes, I have. Given that we really want our students here to develop a culture for innovation, as an old Bart professor myself,
I use that term too, by the way.
long-standing PowerPoint presentation skills. What is the best guidance you can give me as to how to do that with my students?
Okay, and take everything I say with a grain of salt. Okay, like the last thing, if you see the Buddha on the road, kill him. Couple of ideas. One of the things that I've started doing is I've actually started bringing in people to conduct improv classes. So I would suggest maybe attending an improv class.
The Allen Center for Communicating Science, I'm very familiar with them, so anyway.
Yeah, that is a great way. I mean, if you want to get the engineers to start thinking of a cardboard box as something other than a cardboard box, or the same thing with your students, then improv becomes a great way to do that. Another thing, unsolvable problems. And right now we are running a project, and you may find this interesting. Most people go, what? The HR department at Dell has come to us and said, we need to be more innovative. And I don't know if any of you have worked in a large corporation, but that's weird. And what we are doing with them is running them through our training program, but we're having to modify it because our training program was originally designed for engineers. And one of the things I do is every 3 days I send out an impossible problem. Because it's not that you're looking for the answer, there's just a ton of possible answers. And that's, you know, I'm working with the Center for Analytics and Creativity over at USF. And one of the things that we're looking at is, can we create a whole bunch of these impossible questions because there is no right answer to them, that then gets people to get comfortable with having multiple answers for questions.
That sounds very much like the concept of engineering design, where you have a number of potential solutions, problems trying to find
Well, my next suggestion is we have now added a whole design thinking and design theory component to our training classes. And among those, we're finding that we're getting some progress with the engineers. Now, I may shift things around a little bit and have the design thinking class before the improv class, although I have to tell you, I thoroughly enjoy watching engineers in an improv class. I mean, it's a certain set of satisfactions from it. So those are some of the things that we're doing, and they seem to be working, but they're you know, all of them are like within the last 6 months, so I can't. Now, and you'll find this interesting. We modified our training class, and we have been training our salespeople on innovation. Interesting. Now, we've been doing this for 18 months now. We already have data back. The salespeople who have gone through our innovation training have 300% larger pipelines and are closing 10% more deals at 20% more margin compared to people who haven't. And all that is thinking out of the box, or as my group says, there is no box. So hopefully that was a little bit helpful. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, you talked about like a shift kind of where people were working like for projects instead of like for the company. And you mentioned that there's a big project where they're bringing in contractors instead of maybe how they used to where they already had those people hired. Do you think that the employees like working like that more? Or do you think it's the employers are doing it because it's cheaper?
No, actually, it's, you know, when it first got started, okay, when you saw this kind of activity take place, it was basically the offshoring activity that you saw primarily in the the information technology industry. What we're seeing is in all of these other industries, and in fact, what you're seeing is replicated in business and in technology, what has always gone on in the arts and humanities. By the way, that's another theme we've identified, is that the arts and the humanities are beginning to infiltrate business. The actual cultural aspects of the arts and humanities are beginning to infiltrate business and technology. And if you think about it, that makes sense. We want to be more humane, so you would expect some of that to take place. But back to your question, take a look. There's a company called Topcoder. Take a look at Topcoder. The model that we're seeing is and it's almost, if you've had it, you know, studied history, the medieval guilds are kind of reappearing, in which that you come together as experts or professionals or whatever. And, you know, I hate to use the term contract because it has such a bad connotation. You know, are you a 1099 contractor or are you an employee kind of connotation? This is not that. This is people actually forming up and choosing when, where, and how and what they work on. And we're actually seeing that that's a preferred mode of operation. In programming, or you're seeing Topcoder, which is interesting. If I've got a software development project, I will go to Topcoder and say, here's what I want to accomplish. Topcoder doesn't have employees, they have members. And the members will form up in teams, they'll come up with designs, they'll compete against each other. I may actually get 6 or 7 versions of the software. I will pick which one I want, I will pay Topcoder for it. But the members of Topcoder, I may have, you know, let's say they give me 3 versions, A, B, and C, and I decide B is the best and I pay them for B. But the Topcoder members may decide that A was actually the best and may award more money to the team that built A than the team that built B. It's not truly contracting. It's a very different, it's almost a communitarian model, but it's based upon professionals and it sits within a capitalistic kind of environment. That's Topcoder. In the marketing space, there's a company called Tongle that does the exact same thing. And they are literally bringing in multi-million-dollar type of activities. The last thing I'll share with you is, you know, I grew up, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've done about a dozen companies, and we won't give you the statistics on what worked and what didn't work. And I work with VCs, and what's interesting is the nature of startups have changed. Now startups are not, you know, the old model of startups is you would start a company, VC would fund you, you get to a certain point, you would IPO, everybody be rich, happy, and go away. That's not the model anymore. The model now is startups have basically become the R&D arms for large companies. As a startup, you either become what's called a unicorn, which is you've gotten so big we can't IPO you, or you end up getting sold to a large company. So in effect, what has happened is the Hollywood model has shown up in the startup and in the R&D activities of large companies via the startup mechanisms that you're seeing. And it's actually a logical progression. How many people have paid attention to what's going on with Kickstarter? I mean, obviously all of you are interested in Kickstarter. You realize Oculus Rift got $42 million from Kickstarter? The access to capital is not an issue. You don't go talk to a venture capital anymore. You actually, and so you're seeing more and more of these people form up in these small teams, create something, and then turn around and try and sell it to a large company, as opposed to, so it's, people actually want to work that way. Not everybody, but that's the major shift that we're seeing. It's by preference. You're seeing more and more people, for example, of my generation quit and start doing that. In fact, the biggest growth industry right now are what are called hobby companies. People, baby boomers who are basically retiring and creating their own little companies to go do things. Because that's how they're tired of the corporate rat race. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Sean.
All right, yeah, please help me thank Mr. Stikeleather.